Here's my quick thoughts on every single album that I listened to in the month of October. Starting the month off with Projector by Geese. While this is maybe even more ambitious than 3D Country, Geese can't help but shoot themselves in the foot with some extremely disjointed song structures. The ideas here are interesting, the mixing is satisfyingly saturated, and the band's performances are tight, but I just wish the ideas were organized into songs that had more of a logical flow. Then I listened to Hell Mode by Jeff Rosenstock. This is a great and varied enough album that really brings us into Jeff's depiction of a chaotic world. Through Jeff's humor and wit, it almost feels like we should just be embracing this chaos. The instrumentation also does a good job of matching these lyrical themes, as the guitars range from abrasive and distorted to whimsical and playful. Jeff finds the perfect sweet spot between not taking himself too seriously while also coming across as sincere and genuine. While I don't think it's a perfect record, it is one of the better albums of 2023, and it certainly provides some fun jams that I'll definitely be coming back to. Then I listened to We Buy Diabetic Test Strips by Billy Woods and Elucid, also known as Armand Hammer. Billy Woods is on just a crazy streak this year. This is his second album this year that's in album of the year contention for me personally. This is somehow even more challenging and unique than Maps, his previous album he dropped this year, but still extremely enthralling, and just Elucid and Billy's cold flows just steal the show here. This also just has some of the most grimy, left field, and progressive production you're gonna hear on any hip-hop album this year, so please go check it out if you haven't. Then I listened to Drake's Fat D. There's some magic here, but for the most part, this thing is way too bloated and sonically inconsistent. I think I'm just all kind of draked out at this point. His Fat D, it's too much to handle. I am honestly happy that he's hopefully taking a break from music so he can focus on making something that actually is interesting in the future. Like I said, this thing isn't the worst thing he's dropped in recent history. Like CLB was worse than this. Honestly, Nevermind was way worse than this, but just kind of bloated and boring. Then I listened to Earl Sweatshirt and the Alchemist's Voir Dire. Hopefully I said that right. This is my favorite Earl project to date. I gotta be honest, that might be mostly because of the Alchemist production, but either way, this is just some of the best heady hip-hop of the year. Then I listened to Javelin by Sufjan Stevens. This isn't quite up to the same level as Carrie and Lowell, but it certainly is an album that you shouldn't miss. Sufjan is one of the best songwriters out there today, and while this album does have some instrumental moments that I don't love, I think the overall vision is really well thought out and executed with care. If you want to see more thoughts, I do have a full review on this channel, so go check that out. Then I listened to Silence Between Songs by Madison Beer. This is more intriguing than I thought it was going to be, but I think most of that intrigue comes from the production more than Madison. The production avoids a lot of the TikTok-y production gimmicks that I was honestly expecting, but in turn is also often derivative of more popular artists. Like the complete obvious Tame Impala ripoff on Home to Another One. Like, seriously, could the influence be any more obvious? Madison's vocals here are actually pretty solid, as she has enough presence and power in her voice to take hold of these instrumentals, but the songwriting and melodies are lackluster. Overall, there's some potential shown here, but I don't think Madison's quite there just yet. Then I listened to Skinty Fia by Fontaines DC. I'm gonna be honest, the instrumentals carry this album. The mix between dreamy guitars and raw punk drums is interesting, but the vocalist doesn't do much for me. The vocals tend to get monotone and really repetitive melodically. If he did have more bite to his voice, I think it would take this album over the top, but that's just not the case. Then I listened to Something to Give Each Other by Troye Sivan. There's more color and flair to the production here than you're gonna get on a lot of pop today, but man, Troye just doesn't really have any star presence to make this interesting. The songwriting is extremely stale, and the vocals aren't necessarily impressive either. Then I listened to Wall Socket by Underscores. This album pretty much fixes all the issues I had with their last album. The songwriting is improved, and it doesn't rely on flashy production to carry the songs. Obviously, there's still some over-the-top production moments, but they're not being leaned on too heavily. Then I listened to The Moon and the Melodies by Cocteau Twins and Harold Budd. This is the Cocteau Twins' most cold and moody record I've heard, and while the change of pace is interesting, the music here just isn't. The vocals, which are usually stellar on Cocteau Twins records, are rather unremarkable. I think there is a way you can balance a cold and dark atmosphere with interesting and memorable guitar riffs and drum patterns, and sadly, this album doesn't do that. Then I listened to BB Angel by Tinashe. This is just some smooth and straightforward R&B. It does suffer a bit from some boring production, but Tinashe's vocal presence is just too good to ignore. Then I listened to Raven by Kelela. R&B is typically a genre where the vocals really have to grab my attention for me to love it, and that just isn't the case with this album. Kelela's vocals aren't bad by any means, they just feel like the most standard and generic R&B vocals you could possibly get. Production is interesting though, as it combines break beats with traditional R&B aesthetics to create a moody but danceable record. Then I listened to Illinois by Sufjan Stevens. This is a record that covers a lot of topics, but from a wide scope. It feels like Sufjan exploring how to balance his religious beliefs with the values and beliefs of the society, and specifically America. Sonically, this is a lot more triumphant and lively than most of what I've heard from Sufjan, as it opts for less electronics and more horns and natural instruments. This was an intimidating album coming in, but it does feel like an extremely rewarding and fulfilling listen. Then I listened to Did You Know That There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard? Long freaking title by Lana Del Rey. This is unpredictable in the best way. A lot of these tracks feel like they would be attempted, but in a much less interesting way by some boring, run-of-the-mill pop star. There are some risks here that don't work, like those awful hip-hop tracks, but most of the time the risks are rewarding. Then I listened to Food for Worms by Shame. There's some really cool ideas here. The performances are super tight and the instrumentals range from serene to abrasive, and overall this is just one of the most colorful and exciting rock records of the year. Please go check it out. Then I listened to Census Designated by Jane Remover. This is an interesting change of pace for Jane Remover. The songs here are less focused on flashy production and more focused on the songwriting, and for the most part that songwriting pulls through. The overall soundscape is also really striking and distinct. The harsh and fuzzy vocal processing mixed with emo guitars makes for an album that feels like being trapped in an old VHS camera and kind of reliving your memories through choppy and grainy footage. My main issue is that these songs do tend to get a little bit formulaic and predictable. Then I listened to Five Leaves Left by Nick Drake. While the more involved instrumentation is less awkward than it was on Brighter Later, it still often takes away from Nick Drake's strengths as a songwriter. Both Brighter Later and this record have failed to live up to the unique and otherworldly but simultaneously familiar feeling of Pink Moon. Then I listened to Lahai by Sampha. This is just the full package. The vocals, the writing, the production all have a beautiful clarity to it that feels distinct and unique. Sampha's kind of smoky vocal timbre mixed with the detailed interplay with the backing vocals makes for a consistently interesting vocal presence. The production is varied yet cohesive due to the reoccurring piano that ties most of these instrumentals together. This is just kind of filling my personal Frank Ocean void. Stylistically, it's not super similar to Frank, but it just gives me a similar feeling. It's definitely one of the best R&B albums I've heard this year, and just one of the best albums in general. Then I listened to Chet Baker Sings by Chet Baker. This has quickly become one of my favorite records to fall asleep to. Everything is so subtle, gentle, and comforting. It's like the musical equivalent of being wrapped in a warm blanket. It's great. Then I listened to It's the End of the World, But It's a Beautiful Day by 30 Seconds to Mars. This is just 30 minutes of Imagine Dragons ripoffs, and trust me, that's not a band you want to be ripping off. Horribly sugary radio filler and some of the most inhuman and cliche writing that you'll ever hear. It's horrible. Then I listened to Process by Sampha, and I'm just feeling lucky that I've gotten to listen to 2 Sampha albums in such a short span of time. This one is a little bit more straightforward than Lahai, but it's just as impressive vocally and lyrically. Then I listened to Ventura by Anderson .Paak. Anderson .Paak's rapping performances outshine his singing performances on this otherwise pretty stellar funk record. There's something so percussive about his flow when he's rapping, and pairing that with his talent on the drums is special, and I wish there was more of it. Then I listened to Larger Than Life by Brent Faiyaz. This album has a very amateurish feel to it that isn't at all charming, just frustrating. The mixes consistently feel off, often sounding too thin and tinny, and the production in general just feels way too artificial. Brent's vocals, I guess, are the one saving grace here, but all in all, this album kind of sums up what I've come to expect from Brent: solid vocals, underwhelming production, and uninteresting songwriting. And the last album of the month, One More Time by Blink-182. This is the most embarrassing album of the year. Not embarrassing in the way that it's just outright bad, but embarrassing in the way that I feel like I legit got secondhand embarrassment listening to this thing. It's like watching a middle-aged dad try to be cool and edgy and fit in with the youngins, you know? Not to mention, the production sounds just absolutely horrible and extremely compressed, and it's awful. The vocals are so pop punky that they almost feel like parody, but they're not. There's just a complete lack of self-awareness on this record, and it's laughable. And there you go. Those are my thoughts on every single album I listened to in the month of October. Let me know your thoughts on these albums down below. And yeah, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.